Hello and welcome to another episode of Great God Debates. Again, I'm not in my car. It's probably better this way, really. This really is further to my conversations about the book called Misquoting Jesus that I've been reading by Bart D. Ehrman. I was having a conversation with somebody on Facebook just yesterday. It started from the day before. Because I've just started sharing these videos with people. And somebody who I used to go to Christian camps with, she messaged me on Facebook. I won't say who it is. I don't think it's particularly fair, really. And it wasn't about these particular videos. It was about my introduction video. And we had a bit of a lengthy conversation. And one of the things that came up was the fact that we've got so many variant readings from the New Testament that, and the point I've made really, and the point that Bart Ehrman makes, is that there's so many different variants that sometimes it's difficult to tell which ones were the accurate ones, which ones were right, whether or not we can trust them to be the Word of God, if indeed, of course, there is a God in the first place, which you know that I don't assume that anymore. But one of the comebacks that I do hear from people, in particular Lee Strobel, who's written The Case for Christ, which I have read as well before, at least the majority of it. Personally, I find it to be very biased towards, because it only asks Christian authors. He only interviews Christian authors, by the way, and of course they're going to give answers that people want to hear. Not to say that anybody can't have biases. I think we can all have biases. This is why I try to take sort of the broader picture and try to look at it from a wider perspective. Because of course, even Bart Ehrman can have biases. I'm only talking about his book at the moment because I'm reading it. It's not because I think I'm going to sort of put him up on a pedestal and say that he's got it down to a T and he's got everything right. But he makes mention of it, and also this girl make mention of saying that people say that, yeah, but these variant readings, they're minor things. They're, they are, and Lee Strobel's mentioned in a video that it doesn't matter that these variants are there, because in the original Greek language, some things that might be spelt wrong still meant the same thing. So actually, it makes no difference. So they try to say that why do people try to say that there's these variants and actually try to throw people off the truth or the right path or whatever, because it actually, in reality, when it comes down to it, makes no difference. Well, that's certainly true in a lot of cases, but I think commentaries on books like this seem to miss out the fact that he also says the same thing. Bart does say, yeah, the vast majority, they are very minor. And he references sort of historical historians that say the same thing. Yeah, it's true that the majority are indeed minor, and actually it doesn't necessarily change the overall message. But actually, what is also missed out is not all of them are minor. Some of them are quite major sticking points. In particular, references to Jesus being God. Okay, that seems to be, for most Christians, a very big point about Christianity, that Jesus is God. And regardless of the overall message of love, which I think we can all sort of have an understanding of and saying, yeah, do you know what, that's a good message. We all should aim to love each other and do our best for each other because of well-being, empathy that we find that we have, gives us a good sort of understanding that actually well-being should be our goal to treat humanity with. So I don't think that message of love is necessarily an issue, but it's the sticking point is Jesus God? And does the Bible actually say that he's God? And lots of people probably watching this saying, well, yeah, of course it does. And we can go to passages and say, well, look, this is what it says. But I would like to read you an extract from Bart Ehrman's Misquoting Jesus. As I said, I've been reading it. And this is from the chapter called The Quest for Origins, which is chapter 4 in the book. And he's talking about a guy called Johann J. Wettstein, or Wettstein, however you pronounce it, and he was an 18th century biblical scholar. And this is one of the parts in the book that recognises that, yes, there are minor differences and sometimes that doesn't matter. But there's actually specifics that talk about why we probably should question whether the original writings said that Jesus was indeed God, or even alluded to that fact. So let me just read part of this for you, because one part of it says that variant readings may affect minor points in Scripture, but the basic message remains intact no matter which readings one notices, and that's from the very bottom of page 112. So that it makes that point, and it makes it several times in the book as well. Yes, that's fine. But when we look into some specifics, there's a particular verse, 1 Timothy 3:16, that it says this about. So the passage in question, 1 Timothy 3:16, had long been used by advocates of Orthodox theology to support the view that the New Testament itself calls Jesus God. For the text in most manuscripts refers to Christ as God made manifest in the flesh and justified in the spirit. So it says that. As I pointed out in chapter 3, which he does, most manuscripts abbreviate sacred names, the so-called nomina sacra, or sacra, however you pronounce that, I'm not entirely sure, my apologies. Most manuscripts, just said that, abbreviate that, and that is the case here as well, where the Greek word God, I'm just going to show you if you can see that. Is that going to... Oh gosh, okay. That's not particularly clear, unfortunately. My apologies, never mind, but I won't be able to read out those letters, but it says that there are 4 letters and it's abbreviated in 2 letters, okay, which is theta and sigma, okay. That's like the theta appears to be an O with like a line through the middle, and like a capital E, which is called the stigma, with a line drawn over the top to indicate that it is an abbreviation. What Wettstein noticed in examining Codex Alexandrinus was that the line over the top had been drawn in different ink from the surrounding words, and so appeared to be from a later hand, i.e. written by a later scribe. And we've already talked about the fact that there is evidence that things have been added. This is one of those pieces of evidence, okay? Moreover, the horizontal line in the middle of the first letter, the O with a line, which is theta, okay, was not actually part of the letter, but was a line that had bled through from the other side of the old vellum. In other words, rather than being the abbreviation theta stigma for God, the word was actually an omicron or an omicron and a sigma, a different word altogether, which simply means who. The original reading of the manuscript thus did not speak of Christ as God made manifest in the flesh, but of Christ who was made manifest in the flesh. According to the ancient testimony of the Codex Alexandrinus, Christ is no longer explicitly called God in this passage. As Wettstein continues his investigations, he found other passages typically used to affirm the doctrine of divinity of Christ that in fact represented textual problems. When these problems are resolved on text critical grounds, in most instances references to Jesus' divinity are taken away. And then it goes on to include passages like 1 John 5, 7-8, which is often used for Jesus' divinity. And there's another one that's mentioned in Acts 20 verse 28. So, I mean, you look at that and you think, yeah, of course, Bart could be wrong. But actually, when you look, I think if we sort of, as I say, I've said before, look at it from an overall perspective, yeah, he could be, but how would we know? Because actually it seems to be that he's actually, using real stuff there. So we can no longer, based on that, say that, yes, but they're all insignificant. All of these variations, all of these changes, they're insignificant because the overall message is the same. But actually, no, not necessarily. It's not necessarily the same. There are things like that which are quite big, really. Jesus being God, even the Son of God, because yeah, you could probably read that and say, well, maybe that does actually mean he's the Son of God, but it still changes a massive part about what most Christians tend to believe about God, okay, and Jesus. Because for me, one of my biggest sticking points when I first had a conversation nearly 2 years ago with somebody on Facebook, and I mentioned this in my original video, my introduction video, was that for me, the resurrection of Jesus was the nail on the head. That's sort of what affirmed it. And Jesus being God meant that that was perfectly plausible, perfectly possible. But not only have I found no real evidence for that, well, if Jesus wasn't necessarily referred to as God in the first place, like we believe he was, then that really throws a massive spanner in the works, doesn't it? I mean, I think if we're honest about it, yes, it does. It's a huge thing to say that, yeah, there's a message of love in there, which can probably all follow to varying degrees depending on what exactly is said. To actually thinking and believing that Jesus is indeed God and therefore suffered in our place, for example. Because if Jesus was actually just a human being, then the chances of a resurrection significantly go down anyway. And any human being can give us a message of love. One of the guys I am doing Alpha course with, he has made a very good point that, you know, there are lots of people throughout history that have been very influential, such as Billy Graham, and other people that can be influential. They can give us good messages, but none of that means that they're God. Have they ever been referred to as God? Maybe not. But has Jesus really ever been referred to as God? Because we can often say, well, that's the significant difference. Because even if he actually was referred to as God, that still wouldn't make him God. But it turns out there's lots of problems with these texts, and there are significant differences, not just most of them which are minor, which we agree with. But that's significant, and that's food for thought, and something that we all need to ponder, I think. But there we go. That's this video for now. I'm going to leave it there. That's the biggest point for this particular review, and I will catch you later. Bye bye now.